He believed the ocean had already taken everything it could from the world, but before the morning was over, it was about to return the one person he never realized he could not afford to lose. The Atlantic shoreline stretched beneath a sky still bruised by the remnants of last night's storm, where heavy gray clouds drifted slowly eastward and waves rolled onto the empty beach with a quiet persistence that made the entire coastline feel suspended between destruction and peace. Pieces of broken docks floated near the rocks, sea grass clung to wet sand, and scattered driftwood marked the places where the powerful tide had rewritten the landscape only hours earlier. High above the shoreline, a black helicopter cut steadily through the cool morning air as Vincent Castellano sat silently beside the window, his sharp blue eyes scanning every mile below with the same disciplined focus that had earned him a reputation few people ever questioned. At 38 years old, the white mafia boss rarely relied on luck. He trusted preparation, precision, and absolute control. Every inspection flight after a major storm followed the same routine. Survey damaged properties. Check private marinas. Confirm security around coastal warehouses. Return to Manhattan before the business day began. It had always been predictable. Until today, the pilot continued describing storm damage over the headset, but Vincent barely listened. Something near the edge of the surf caught his attention. At first it appeared to be nothing more than storm debris tangled among patches of seaweed, yet an uneasy feeling settled over him as the helicopter drifted farther north. He leaned closer to the glass. The shape did not move with the waves. It remained strangely still. "Circle back," he said quietly. The pilot immediately banked left. As the aircraft descended for another pass, the object became unmistakably human. Vincent's expression changed almost imperceptibly. "Land now." Sand exploded beneath the spinning blades as the helicopter touched down on a narrow stretch of firm shoreline. Vincent stepped out before the engines had fully settled, ignoring the wind pulling against his jacket as he hurried across the damp beach. His polished shoes sank into the wet sand while cold ocean spray brushed against his face, yet none of it slowed him. 20 yards away, something silver reflected the morning sunlight. A bracelet. Simple, elegant, decorated with tiny engraved stars. Vincent stopped without realizing it. He knew that bracelet. 3 years earlier, after Castellano Global completed its largest expansion in company history, he had presented identical gifts to only 4 senior employees. 3 of them had eventually replaced theirs with expensive watches or designer jewelry. Only one person continued wearing hers every single day. Amara, he whispered, the name escaping almost involuntarily. Amara Brooks lay motionless near the tide line, her dark curls damp with seawater and her navy business coat dusted with fine sand carried by the storm. The leather portfolio she always carried to work was nowhere in sight. One of her shoes had washed several feet away, resting beside a weathered piece of driftwood. She looked impossibly distant from the calm, organized woman who somehow managed every impossible schedule, remembered every forgotten detail, and quietly solved problems before anyone else even noticed they existed. Vincent dropped to one knee beside her, carefully brushing wet strands of hair away from her face with hands that suddenly felt unfamiliar to him. Her skin was cool from the ocean breeze, but beneath that chill he sensed the faintest trace of warmth. Relief arrived so suddenly that it almost felt painful. "Amara." His voice grew steadier. "Stay with me." The only answer came from another gentle wave reaching the shoreline before slipping quietly back into the sea. Behind him, 2 members of his security team ran toward them carrying emergency blankets and medical equipment from the helicopter. Vincent barely acknowledged their presence. His attention remained fixed on the woman before him. Images flashed through his mind without warning. Every morning coffee already waiting on his desk before sunrise. Every international flight perfectly organized before he asked. Every handwritten reminder tucked inside his meeting folders so he would never forget to call his grandmother on Sundays. Every quiet smile she offered employees who believed nobody noticed their work. He suddenly realized he knew exactly how efficiently Amara managed an empire worth billions of dollars. Yet he had never asked where she spent holidays, whether she had family waiting for her at home, or what dreams existed beyond the office walls. For years, he had mistaken constant reliability for ordinary routine. Standing on that empty shoreline, with the restless Atlantic stretching endlessly behind them. Vincent Castellano understood for the first time that the strongest person in his organization had been quietly carrying far more than responsibilities, and whatever had brought her to this lonely beach had already begun changing his life long before he ever found her. The helicopter lifted off only moments later, cutting through heavy gray clouds as the Atlantic shoreline disappeared beneath them, but Vincent never once looked back toward the beach. Every second inside the cabin felt impossibly slow. One of the emergency medical specialists carefully monitored Amara while another adjusted warm blankets around her to protect her from the lingering cold left by the storm. The rhythmic sound of the helicopter blades filled the silence, yet Vincent heard almost none of it. His attention never drifted from the woman lying only a few feet away. He had witnessed countless moments of crisis throughout his life, negotiated impossible situations under unbearable pressure, and remained calm while others surrendered to panic. Today was different. Today, every passing minute felt personal. The flight to St. Andrew Medical Center lasted only 18 minutes, but Vincent measured it in quiet glances rather than time. Every few moments, he searched Amara's face for the smallest sign of movement, hoping to see her open her eyes or speak a single word. Nothing came. When the helicopter finally landed on the hospital roof, an emergency team was already waiting. They moved with practiced efficiency, carefully transferring Amara onto a mobile stretcher before disappearing through automatic doors leading toward the trauma department. Vincent followed, without hesitation, until a physician gently stopped him outside the treatment area. "We will do everything we can," the doctor said calmly. "Please give us a little time." The doors closed, leaving Vincent standing alone beneath bright white lights that seemed almost painfully quiet after the roar of the helicopter. Anthony Russo arrived only minutes later, his expression filled with concern after receiving an emergency call from the security team. "What happened?" he asked softly. Vincent stared toward the closed doors before answering. "I do not know." Those 4 words surprised Anthony more than any explanation ever could. Vincent was a man who always knew. He knew every financial report before board meetings began. He knew every security risk before anyone else noticed it. He knew every negotiation 3 steps ahead. Yet today he knew nothing except that someone he depended upon was fighting for another chance to wake up. Nearly an hour passed before the attending physician returned. His face remained professional, but there was cautious hope in his eyes. "She made it through the most critical stage," he explained. "However, another 10 minutes without treatment could have changed everything. The next 24 hours will be extremely important." Relief settled quietly across Vincent's face, though it never fully reached his eyes. He thanked the doctor with a sincerity that surprised even himself before taking a seat outside the intensive care unit. The chair felt unfamiliar. Waiting felt unfamiliar. Across the hallway, families came and went, speaking softly with nurses while carrying flowers, coffee cups, and overnight bags. Vincent remained exactly where he was. Hours slipped by unnoticed. His phone vibrated repeatedly with incoming calls from executives, attorneys, and business partners, but one by one he silenced every notification without reading the screen. For the first time in years, billion-dollar contracts no longer demanded his attention. Through the narrow glass window of the intensive care room, he could barely see Amara surrounded by softly glowing monitors and attentive nurses. She looked impossibly small beneath crisp white blankets. A young nurse eventually approached, carrying a folded hospital blanket. "Sir, you should warm up. Your clothes are still wet from the beach." Vincent accepted the blanket politely, but left it folded across his lap. Instead, he asked the only question that mattered. "Has she opened her eyes?" The nurse offered a sympathetic smile before gently shaking her head. "Not yet, but her condition is stable." "That is encouraging." After she walked away, Vincent leaned back and closed his eyes for the first time since leaving the shoreline. Memories surfaced without invitation. Every morning coffee already waiting before his first meeting. Every reminder tucked neatly inside important files. Every forgotten birthday she somehow remembered for employees throughout the company. Every Sunday afternoon message reminding him to call his grandmother before she became worried. He had always accepted those thoughtful gestures as part of her job, never realizing they reflected the character of the person rather than the duties of the position. Anthony quietly returned carrying a clear evidence bag recovered from the beach. Inside rested Amara's company identification badge, slightly scratched but still recognizable. Vincent picked it up carefully and noticed something he had overlooked for 3 years. Attached beside her photograph was a tiny blue sticker shaped like a lighthouse. He studied it silently, wondering why such a small detail suddenly felt important. Then Anthony spoke again. "We searched her apartment. Nothing appears missing. But there is one thing you should know. Her work laptop is gone." Vincent slowly lifted his eyes from the badge. For the first time since arriving at the hospital, something colder than fear settled into his thoughts. Whatever had happened before the storm had not ended on that beach. It had only begun. Morning sunlight slowly filtered through the tall hospital windows, replacing the gray storm clouds with a calm golden glow that made the intensive care wing feel almost peaceful. Yet for Vincent Castellano, peace remained impossibly far away. He had not left the hospital once since the helicopter landed. Coffee sat untouched beside him, his jacket remained folded across the back of a chair, and every member of his security team quietly understood that no meeting, negotiation, or emergency inside his business empire would persuade him to leave until Amara Brooks opened her eyes. Shortly after sunrise, Anthony Russo returned carrying a secure tablet instead of his usual stack of reports. One glance at Anthony's face told Vincent that the investigation had finally begun producing answers. "We rebuilt most of her last day," Anthony said as he placed the tablet on the small waiting room table. Security camera footage filled the screen. At 7:12 that morning, Amara stepped out of her apartment carrying the familiar leather portfolio she never left behind. At 7:38, she stopped at the same neighborhood coffee shop where the owner greeted her with a smile and handed her the usual drink without asking for her order. At 8:10, she entered Castellano Global Headquarters, holding the elevator doors open for 2 delivery workers whose hands were full of heavy packages. Nothing about her routine appeared unusual. Every recording showed the same calm professionalism that defined her every day. Another clip appeared. 5:43 in the afternoon. Employees began leaving headquarters after another ordinary workday. Amara remained behind at the reception desk for several extra minutes, helping an elderly visitor arrange transportation before finally walking outside alone. Then the timeline simply ended. Anthony enlarged a city map covered with red markers. "This is where everything stops making sense," he explained quietly. Every traffic camera covering her normal route went offline for 37 minutes. Parking garage footage disappeared. 2 nearby security systems suffered identical failures at exactly the same time. Vincent studied the map without speaking. Coincidences had never survived long inside his world. Anthony continued. "The city blamed the outages on storm damage, but our technical consultants disagree. They believe the systems were interrupted before the weather became severe." Vincent slowly folded his arms. "Someone wanted those 37 minutes erased." Anthony nodded. "Once. That is our conclusion." Before either man spoke again, another notification appeared on the tablet. The company's information technology department had completed an inventory of Amara's office. Nothing had been removed except her encrypted work laptop. Her desk remained perfectly organized, exactly as she always left it. Even tomorrow's meeting folders had already been prepared before she disappeared. Vincent walked into her office less than an hour later. Sunlight spilled across the polished hardwood floor, while the faint scent of fresh lilies lingered in the air. Everything reflected Amara's quiet attention to detail. Color-coded folders rested neatly beside a leather planner. A handwritten reminder sat beneath a crystal paperweight. "Do not forget Mrs. Romano's retirement celebration next Friday." Beside it rested a small envelope addressed to facilities thanking the overnight cleaning staff for helping prepare the executive floor before an important conference. Vincent slowly sat in the chair opposite her desk, realizing that even the smallest details carried her unmistakable kindness. Then his attention settled on something unusual. Attached beneath the edge of her desk with clear tape was another tiny blue lighthouse sticker identical to the one fixed beside her employee identification badge. Anthony carefully removed it. "That is the second one." Vincent looked around the office one final time before opening the bottom drawer of her filing cabinet. Inside lay a simple black notebook. Most pages contained ordinary scheduling notes, grocery reminders, and birthdays for employees throughout the company. Then he reached a page written only 2 nights earlier. The handwriting remained steady and precise. If I disappear before finishing this, the lighthouse will explain everything. Vincent quietly closed the notebook as an unexpected chill settled across the silent office. The small sticker had never been decoration. It had always been a message waiting for the right person to understand it. At that exact moment, Anthony's phone rang. He listened for several seconds before looking directly at Vincent. The hospital just called. There has been a change. She is responding to voices, but before the nurse could ask another question, she whispered only one word. Vincent stood immediately. What word? Anthony answered without hesitation. Lighthouse. The drive to Harbor Point Lighthouse began before sunrise, when the city still rested beneath a pale blue sky and the streets remained unusually quiet after the passing storm. Vincent sat in the back of the black sedan without speaking, his thoughts returning again and again to the single word that had escaped Amara's lips inside the intensive care unit. Lighthouse. It was the same symbol hidden on her identification badge, beneath her office desk, and inside her notebook. 3 separate clues placed deliberately where only someone paying close attention would eventually find them. Anthony Russo drove in silence, reviewing satellite maps and property records on his tablet until the skyline slowly disappeared behind them. 40 minutes later, the old lighthouse appeared above the rocky shoreline, its white stone tower standing against the Atlantic exactly as it had for more than a century. The storm had scattered branches across the narrow road leading to the entrance, but the beacon itself continued its slow, unwavering rotation across the water. Vincent stepped out into the cool ocean breeze and immediately noticed the familiar blue lighthouse sticker attached to a weathered donation box beside the front gate. It matched the others perfectly. This was never a coincidence. It had always been a trail. Inside the small visitor building, an elderly caretaker looked up from a wooden desk as the 2 men entered. His silver hair framed a kind face shaped by decades of salt air and long mornings beside the sea. A brass nameplate identified him as Harold Benson. Vincent quietly placed Amara's company photograph on the desk. Harold adjusted his glasses before a gentle smile crossed his face. Miss Brooks, he said warmly. I wondered if someone would come looking for her. Vincent exchanged a brief glance with Anthony. You know her? Harold nodded. She visited several times over the last few months. Always polite. Always curious. She asked about shipping records, Old Harbor, maps, and maintenance schedules. Most people came here to admire the view. She came here looking for answers. Harold slowly unlocked the bottom drawer of his desk and removed a small sealed envelope. She asked me to keep this safe. She said if anything unexpected happened, I should only give it to the man in the photograph she left behind. Vincent accepted the envelope carefully. His name appeared across the front in Amara's unmistakable handwriting. He opened it with steady hands. Inside rested a compact, encrypted flash drive and a folded handwritten note. Mr. Castellano, if you are reading this, then you trusted the lighthouse instead of the obvious path. Thank you. Everything I could verify is stored here. I could not risk leaving these records inside the office because I no longer knew who might find them first. Please remember that fear often hides behind familiar faces, but kindness never does. Vincent quietly lowered the letter while Anthony inserted the flash drive into a secure tablet. Hundreds of organized files appeared almost instantly. Financial records, shipping manifests, internal communication logs, visitor access reports, and carefully indexed notes filled the screen. Every document had been arranged with remarkable precision. There were no accusations without evidence, no emotional conclusions, only patiently collected facts stretching back nearly 6 months. Anthony opened the first investigative summary. She was tracking unauthorized changes to charitable supply shipments, he said quietly. Someone redirected company resources through legitimate paperwork without drawing attention. Vincent continued reading. Every irregular transaction had been verified through multiple sources before Amara documented it. Every unusual signature had been compared against authentic records. She had quietly built a complete investigation while continuing to perform every responsibility expected of her each day. One final folder caught Vincent's attention. It was titled Personal Notes. He opened the first page. If these records ever reach you, I hope they arrive because the truth succeeded, not because I failed. My responsibility was never to protect a company. It was to protect the people who trusted it. Vincent closed the tablet for a long moment as the steady beam from the lighthouse swept across the window behind Harold. For the first time since finding Amara on the shoreline, he understood the full weight she had carried alone. She had not simply organized his schedule or protected his business. She had quietly protected his future, never expecting recognition in return. Then Anthony's phone vibrated. He answered immediately before looking toward Vincent with unmistakable relief. "The hospital just called," he said softly. "Her condition has improved again. The doctors believe she may regain full consciousness very soon." Vincent looked once more toward the lighthouse, standing against the endless Atlantic. The hidden trail had finally revealed its first truth, but deep inside he knew the greatest revelation was still waiting for him at Amara's bedside. Vincent returned to St. Andrew Medical Center just as the late afternoon sun painted long bands of golden light across the hospital corridors. The same hallway that had felt cold and uncertain only a day earlier now carried a quiet sense of hope. Nurses greeted him with reassuring smiles, and even the steady rhythm of medical monitors seemed less intimidating than before. Outside Amara's room, Anthony remained reviewing the files recovered from the lighthouse, comparing every document against company records while independent forensic analysts verified each piece of evidence. Nothing they found suggested personal revenge. Instead, every record pointed toward a carefully hidden network of dishonest decisions that had quietly grown inside the organization for years. What surprised Vincent most was not the scale of the deception, but the patience with which Amara had uncovered it. She had never rushed toward conclusions. Every page she prepared contained supporting evidence, additional verification, and handwritten reminders questioning her own assumptions before accusing anyone else. The attending physician approached with encouraging news. "She has been awake for several minutes at a time. Her strength is returning slowly. Please remember that she still needs calm conversations." Vincent thanked him before gently opening the door. Soft afternoon light filled the room as Amara rested against raised pillows, looking noticeably stronger than the woman he had carried from the shoreline. Her eyes slowly lifted toward him, and for the first time since the storm they met his with quiet recognition. A faint smile appeared across her face. "You found it," she whispered. Vincent pulled a chair beside her bed. "The lighthouse. Exactly as you hoped." Relief softened her expression before she closed her eyes for a brief moment. "Then the evidence is safe." Vincent nodded. "Every file. Every note." Anthony already confirmed most of it. Amara remained silent for several seconds before asking the question that surprised him most. "Did anyone innocent lose their job?" Vincent gently shook his head. "No. Nothing has happened without evidence. Just as you wanted." She released a slow breath of relief. "Good." Vincent studied her quietly. She had awakened after everything she had endured, yet her first concern was not her own recovery. It was the well-being of people who might be affected by the investigation. That realization settled deeply inside him. "Amara," he said softly, "why did you carry all of this alone?" She looked toward the sunlight stretching across the floor before answering. "Because uncertainty can destroy good people just as quickly as dishonesty. I needed facts before I asked anyone else to carry the burden." Vincent lowered his eyes. "You should have trusted me sooner." A gentle smile returned to her face. "I did trust you. That is why I wanted to protect your judgment instead of testing it." Those words lingered between them in complete silence. Vincent reached into his jacket and placed the handwritten letter from the lighthouse beside her bed. "I read every page." Amara glanced at the folded paper before quietly nodding. "Then you know why I stayed late so many evenings." Vincent slowly leaned back in his chair. "I also know something else now. I knew every meeting you scheduled. I knew every deadline you managed. I knew every problem you solved before it reached my desk. But I never stopped long enough to know the woman doing all those things." Amara looked at him with gentle surprise. Vincent continued before emotion could interrupt him. "I did not know about your aunt. I did not know you paid for your younger cousins to attend school. I did not know you visited retired employees every month or quietly covered emergency expenses for staff members who never told anyone they needed help. I saw an exceptional assistant. I failed to see an extraordinary human being." Tears gathered in Amara's eyes, though she smiled through them. "You gave me opportunities that changed my life. I never expected anything more." Vincent slowly shook his head. Respect should never begin only after someone nearly disappears from our lives. Before either of them could speak again, Anthony entered carrying another recovered file from the forensic team. "We found one final document hidden inside the encrypted archive," he said quietly. "It contains the location of the last meeting Amara planned before everything changed." Vincent accepted the folder and carefully opened it. Inside was a single address, tomorrow's date from the previous week, and one handwritten sentence beneath it in Amara's unmistakable handwriting. "If this meeting confirms what I believe, everything inside the company will finally make sense." Vincent looked from the page back to Amara, realizing that although the hidden evidence had finally been uncovered, the final piece of the truth was still waiting for them, and this time neither of them would face it alone. The following morning sunlight streamed through the wide windows of the executive conference room at Castellano Global, illuminating polished oak tables that had witnessed years of difficult negotiations and important decisions. Yet this meeting felt unlike any that had come before it. There were no financial forecasts displayed on the screens, no investment charts, and no expansion proposals waiting for approval. Instead, every senior executive sat quietly reviewing copies of the documents Amara Brooks had patiently assembled over the previous 6 months. Independent forensic specialists had now verified every file recovered from the lighthouse, confirming that each observation, each handwritten note, and every supporting record had been carefully documented before Amara reached a single conclusion. Vincent entered the room precisely at 9 o'clock, accompanied by Anthony Russo. His calm expression immediately silenced the quiet conversations taking place around the table. Without raising his voice, Vincent began speaking. "Everything you are reading today was prepared by one employee who believed that truth deserved patience before judgment." He allowed the words to settle before continuing. "These findings will not be used to embarrass anyone or satisfy anger. They will be used to restore trust." Several executives slowly nodded while continuing to study the evidence. One senior financial officer finally looked up and asked, "She completed all of this while still managing your daily operations?" Anthony answered before Vincent could respond. "Every page was written after regular business hours. She never requested additional staff, never asked for recognition, and never interrupted her responsibilities." A heavy silence settled across the room as the realization slowly reached everyone present. For years they had admired Amara's remarkable efficiency, without understanding the extraordinary dedication that existed behind it. Vincent pressed another button on the presentation remote, revealing a timeline prepared from Amara's investigation. Every unusual shipment, every altered authorization, and every unexplained scheduling change appeared in chronological order. Rather than accusing individuals, the timeline revealed a culture where small compromises had quietly accumulated until honesty itself required protection. "This company will move forward," Vincent said evenly, "but we will do so the way Amara intended. Every decision will be based on verified facts. Every employee will receive fairness. No assumption will replace evidence." No one objected. No dramatic confrontation interrupted the meeting. The strength of the evidence made unnecessary what raised voices never could accomplish. By early afternoon, the board unanimously approved an independent ethics review, expanded internal safeguards, and new reporting procedures designed to protect every employee regardless of position. When Anthony later shared the outcome with Amara at the hospital, she closed her eyes with visible relief. "Thank you," she whispered. "Now the people who did nothing wrong will not have to fear the truth." Vincent stood beside the window overlooking the East River before turning toward her. "You still think about everyone else before yourself." Amara smiled gently. "That is what responsibility means." Vincent remained quiet for several moments before speaking again. "I spent years believing leadership meant making the hardest decisions. You taught me that leadership also means noticing the quiet people who carry everyone else." Amara looked at him thoughtfully. "Sometimes the strongest people are simply the ones nobody remembers to thank." Those words stayed with Vincent long after the conversation ended. Later that evening, he returned alone to company headquarters. The executive floor had become unusually peaceful after employees left for the day. As he walked through the empty offices, he noticed details that had once escaped his attention. Fresh flowers stood in reception because Amara had arranged weekly deliveries months in advance. Birthday cards already waited inside interoffice mailboxes for celebrations scheduled the following week. Small handwritten notes thanking maintenance workers rested beside supply cabinets. Every thoughtful gesture had been prepared quietly, without expectation of acknowledgement. Vincent paused outside Amara's office, where the tiny blue lighthouse sticker still remained attached beneath the edge of her desk. For the first time, he understood what it truly represented. A lighthouse never demanded attention for itself. It simply stood in the darkness, guiding others safely home. Amara had lived the same way. She had illuminated dangers before anyone else recognized them, protected people who never knew they needed protection, and asked for nothing except the opportunity to do what was right. As Vincent gently touched the small blue sticker, his phone vibrated with a message from Anthony. Independent investigators had identified the final missing witness connected to Amara's unfinished meeting, and that witness had agreed to speak the following morning. Vincent looked once more across the quiet office before slipping the phone back into his pocket. After weeks of unanswered questions, the final piece of the truth was finally ready to reveal itself. The next morning arrived with an unusual sense of calm that seemed almost impossible after everything the previous weeks had uncovered. Sunlight reflected from the glass towers surrounding Castellano Global as employees quietly returned to work, unaware that the final unanswered question was about to receive its long-awaited answer. At precisely 10 o'clock, Vincent and Anthony entered a private conference room reserved for confidential meetings. Waiting for them was an elderly logistics coordinator named Daniel Mercer, a man who had retired nearly 6 months earlier after more than 3 decades with the company. His posture remained straight despite his age, but his hands revealed a quiet nervousness as he carefully folded them across the conference table. Vincent greeted him with unexpected warmth before inviting him to sit. "Thank you for coming," he said calmly. Daniel nodded. "I should have spoken much sooner." Anthony placed several documents recovered from Amara's encrypted files on the table between them. "Miss Brooks scheduled a meeting with you the evening before she disappeared. We believe you were the last person she intended to speak with." Daniel looked down at the familiar handwriting and slowly closed his eyes. "She asked me one question that changed everything," he said quietly. "She wanted to know why several charitable shipments always passed through the same warehouse before reaching their final destinations." Vincent remained silent, allowing the older man to continue without interruption. "I told her the truth," Daniel said. "Years ago, those shipments followed that route because it was efficient. Later, a few administrators quietly continued using the paperwork even after the warehouse stopped serving that purpose. Small shortcuts became accepted habits. Those habits eventually allowed dishonest people to hide their actions inside ordinary procedures." Anthony compared Daniel's explanation with Amara's notes before looking toward Vincent. Every detail matched perfectly. There had never been a hidden mastermind controlling everything from the shadows. Instead, years of neglected oversight had created opportunities that a small number of dishonest individuals quietly exploited. Amara had understood that from the beginning. She had refused to accuse an imaginary villain because the truth was more complicated. Systems fail one small decision at a time before they fail completely. Daniel reached into his briefcase and carefully removed a sealed envelope. "She left this with me after our meeting," he explained. "She said I should only deliver it after the investigation reached the truth instead of assumptions." Vincent opened the envelope with steady hands. Inside rested a handwritten letter. "Mr. Castellano, if you are reading this, then you already know the most important lesson. The greatest danger was never one person. It was the moment good people stopped asking careful questions because routine felt comfortable. Please do not rebuild this company through fear. Rebuild it through trust that is earned every day." Vincent read the final sentence twice before quietly folding the letter. No one spoke for several moments. The silence carried far more meaning than any dramatic confrontation ever could. Daniel finally smiled with visible relief. "She believed you would understand." Vincent looked toward the conference room windows where morning light stretched across the city skyline. "I do now." Later that afternoon, he returned to the hospital carrying the letter with him. Amara had grown noticeably stronger, sitting comfortably beside the window while reviewing physical therapy exercises with one of the nurses. When the nurse quietly excused herself, Vincent handed Amara the folded pages. She recognized her own handwriting immediately and smiled. Daniel kept his promise. Vincent nodded. He also helped us understand something neither of us expected. There was never one hidden mastermind. There were simply too many people willing to ignore small compromises until they became large problems. Amara looked thoughtfully toward the bright afternoon sky. That is why I kept collecting evidence. I wanted to repair the culture, not destroy the people. Vincent smiled quietly. And because of that, we still have a company worth rebuilding. Before either of them could continue, Anthony entered carrying a document signed by the Independent Review Committee. Every recommendation had been unanimously approved. Every corrective measure would become permanent company policy. Amara accepted the report with quiet satisfaction before looking toward Vincent. For the first time since the storm, neither of them spoke about investigations, missing files, or unanswered questions. There were no mysteries left to solve. Only a future waiting to be built upon the foundation that one quiet woman had protected when almost no one realized how much depended upon her courage. 6 weeks later, the headquarters of Castellano Global felt noticeably different from the place it had been before the storm. Nothing about the building itself had changed. The marble floors still reflected the morning sunlight. The elevators still carried employees to every department, and the city skyline still stretched beyond the glass walls. Yet the atmosphere had quietly transformed. Conversations had become warmer. Managers greeted assistants by name before discussing business. Executives paused to thank receptionists at the front desk instead of walking past them without a glance. Small changes appeared everywhere, not because someone demanded them, but because people had finally begun paying attention to one another. On Monday morning, the lobby filled with employees nearly 30 minutes before the workday officially began. Fresh white lilies stood beside the reception desk, and a large digital display welcomed everyone with a simple message. "Welcome home, Amara Brooks." No corporate slogans appeared beneath it. No marketing campaign surrounded it. The words alone carried more meaning than any elaborate celebration ever could. When the elevator doors opened, conversations slowly faded into complete silence. Amara stepped into the lobby wearing a light blue business suit and comfortable shoes, recommended by her physical therapist. She still moved carefully, but confidence had returned to her steady smile. For a brief moment she stopped, surprised to see nearly every department represented in the lobby. The maintenance supervisor she greeted every morning presented her with a small bouquet of daisies because he remembered she once mentioned they reminded her of her childhood garden. The security officers applauded first, followed by accountants, receptionists, engineers, and administrative staff. No one had rehearsed the moment. Gratitude simply spread naturally through the room. Amara smiled through quiet tears. "You really did not have to do this," she said softly. An older receptionist gently shook her head. "We should have thanked you years ago." Before Amara could answer, the conference room doors opened, and Vincent walked toward her carrying a navy blue presentation folder. He wore no expression of authority that morning, only quiet respect. He stopped a few feet away while every employee watched in complete silence. For a long time, Vincent began calmly. "I believed leadership meant making difficult decisions and protecting what I had built. I was only seeing half of the picture." He looked directly at Amara before continuing. "Real leadership also means recognizing the people who quietly protect everyone else without asking for recognition themselves." He handed her the folder. Inside rested an official appointment approved unanimously by the board of directors. Effective immediately, Amara Brooks would become Executive Director of Ethics and Organizational Integrity with complete independence to review policies, investigate concerns, and report directly to the board as well as to Vincent himself. She looked up in disbelief. "This is far more than I expected." Vincent smiled gently. "No, it is simply where respect should have started." The silence lasted only another heartbeat before applause filled the lobby. Employees rose to their feet one after another until every person in the room stood together. There were no dramatic speeches and no flashing cameras. Only genuine appreciation expressed through a simple standing ovation that seemed to last forever. Anthony watched quietly from the back of the room with a satisfied smile, knowing that the strongest victory had never come from exposing hidden records. It came from changing the culture those records had protected. Later that afternoon, Vincent and Amara drove together to Harbor Point Lighthouse for the first time since the investigation ended. The Atlantic looked completely different beneath clear blue skies. with gentle waves rolling across the shoreline where families walked peacefully along the sand. The lighthouse beam continued its slow, familiar rotation across the water. Vincent looked toward the horizon before speaking. I used to believe strength meant never changing my mind. Amara followed the movement of the distant waves. Sometimes changing your mind is the strongest decision you can make. Vincent nodded thoughtfully. The breeze carried the scent of salt and fresh air as both of them stood quietly watching the lighthouse continue its endless work. It never demanded attention. It never asked for praise. It simply remained faithful to its purpose, guiding others through darkness, one steady light at a time. Looking at the old white tower, Vincent finally understood why Amara had chosen it as her symbol. Some people change the world without raising their voices, and when they are finally recognized, they illuminate everyone around them just as faithfully as the lighthouse had illuminated that shoreline for generations. 1 year later, the story that had quietly transformed Castellano Global continued to shape lives far beyond the walls of the company. New employees no longer began their careers by memorizing organizational charts or learning quarterly objectives alone. Their first orientation session introduced them to a simple principle that now guided every decision inside the organization. Every person deserved the same respect regardless of title, position, or responsibility. Amara Brooks personally welcomed each new team member, not with speeches about success, but with conversations about integrity, accountability, and the quiet choices that defined character long before recognition ever arrived. The ethics and organizational integrity office had become one of the most trusted departments in the company. Employees who once remained silent now felt comfortable asking questions, reporting concerns, and offering ideas without fear of being ignored. Problems were addressed early because people finally believed their voices mattered. The greatest achievement was not measured by revenue or expansion. It was measured by trust that had been rebuilt one honest decision at a time. On a bright autumn afternoon, Vincent and Amara returned once again to Harbor Point Lighthouse, this time joined by employees, local families, students, and community leaders celebrating the opening of the Harbor Point Leadership Foundation. The restored lighthouse overlooked the Atlantic exactly as it had for generations, but its purpose had quietly grown beyond guiding ships. Inside the renovated visitor center, educational programs now taught ethical leadership, public service, and community responsibility to students from across the region. Scholarships supported young people who demonstrated kindness, perseverance, and integrity in their schools and neighborhoods. Above the entrance, a bronze plaque carried only one sentence: "Quiet courage lights the way for everyone else." Harold Benson, the retired caretaker, smiled proudly as children explored the exhibits and listened to stories about ordinary people whose honesty changed countless lives. He looked toward Vincent and spoke with gentle satisfaction. She always believed this place could become more than a lighthouse. Vincent nodded before quietly answering. She was right again. As the ceremony ended, Amara walked slowly along the familiar shoreline where gentle waves rolled across the sand beneath a peaceful blue sky. The same beach that had once represented uncertainty had become a place of gratitude and renewal. Vincent joined her, carrying 2 cups of warm coffee from the small cafe overlooking the harbor. They stood together watching the lighthouse beam continue its steady rotation across the water. After a comfortable silence, Vincent finally spoke. "Do you remember the first day we met?" Amara smiled warmly. "I remember worrying that I was overdressed for the interview." Vincent laughed softly. "I remember believing I was interviewing an excellent assistant." He paused before continuing. "I had no idea I was meeting the person who would completely change the way I understand leadership." Amara looked toward the horizon where sunlight shimmered across the Atlantic. People do not change because someone tells them to. They change because one day they finally see what has always been there. Vincent slowly nodded. He understood now that power alone could never earn loyalty, and authority alone could never inspire trust. Respect had to be practiced long before it was expected in return. Nearby, several employees waved as they prepared to leave with their families, and each of them smiled warmly at both Vincent and Amara before walking toward the parking area. There were no reporters waiting for interviews, no dramatic celebrations, and no headlines announcing what had happened over the past year. The greatest victories rarely needed an audience. They simply revealed themselves through the lives quietly changed along the way. As evening settled over the Atlantic, the lighthouse continued shining across the water with the same faithful purpose it had carried for generations, never asking for recognition and never growing tired of guiding others through uncertain nights. Vincent looked once more toward the woman standing beside him and silently understood that the strongest people were often the ones who never asked to stand in the spotlight. They simply chose what was right, even when nobody seemed to notice. And on that peaceful shoreline, beneath the steady light of the old lighthouse and the endless sky beyond the ocean, the world quietly remembered that true greatness is never measured by power alone, but by the dignity, kindness, and courage we choose to protect in one another.